Hello, I'm Ian Truscott. You may know me as the host of the Rockstar CMO Effing Marketing Podcast, but I'm here to share that we're kicking off the inaugural MPN Podcast Awards, which will be hosted by Gordon Glenister, podcaster, author, and the Don of influencer marketing. What say you, Gordon?
The Marketing Podcast Network is a community of marketers who podcast. And we thought it was high time to recognize the podcasts that we love, marketing podcasts. But these awards aren't just about the shows on our network. The MPN Awards are open to all marketing podcasts. And this is our chance to shine a light on the voices right across the entire marketing podcast community. So don't delay. Enter the MPN Awards.
You heard Gordon. Let us know your favorite marketing podcast and enter at mpn-awards.com or follow the Marketing Podcast Network on LinkedIn for all of our updates.
You enjoy podcasts. We know because you're listening to one. Hi, I'm Jason Falls, the executive producer of the Marketing Podcast Network. We love podcasts too, so much so that in addition to providing you with the great episode you're listening to, we also help businesses, brands, and even individuals produce their podcasts. MPN Studios offers podcast consulting and production services to help you get you or your business its very own podcast. We've helped dozens of smart people, advertising agencies, and brands develop podcasts. All you do is record your content or interview. We take that and deliver a professionally produced audio or video episode complete with show notes, transcriptions, and even promotional clips to use on social media. And our monthly subscription prices are hard to beat. If you or your company are jonesing to have your own podcast to establish thought leadership, drive business leads, or just have fun talking about your business or topic of choice, we'd love to help. Learn more at marketingpodcasts.net/studio. That's marketingpodcasts.net/studio.
Welcome to Storylines Live, the only podcast that explores the power and the meaning of the most important story in business. The one that answers why somebody should buy from you, work for you, invest in you, or partner with you. This is the story that defines the character and nature of your organization. In each episode, we feature guests who have great insights on business storytelling, who can share their experiences and key learnings to help you and your business do a better job of sharing what we call your capital S story to deliver remarkable business results. In this episode, we're honored to have somebody I consider a friend, Chris Britton. Chris is the founding executive of RockDove Solutions. They're the developers of In Case of Crisis. It's an award-winning issue and crisis management platform, and they have hundreds of institutions that they serve globally. Chris oversees strategy, revenue, client services, and operations. He's advised and implemented crisis management, business continuity, communications, and emergency management programs for hundreds of organizations on 4 continents, sometimes in his sleep. Sorry, that's a joke. We know you don't do that. Chris has decades of executive leadership experience growing SaaS and mobile app companies. And we're going to talk about that today, folks. Serving risk, crisis management, business continuity, public relations, and public affairs. Chris was also a founding executive with Vocus, which was acquired by Cision, and he's held leadership positions with AT&T, Rosetta Stone, and Interfolio. Chris is a graduate of the University of Dayton in my home state of Ohio. Woohoo! Love it, Chris, where he went to the School of Business Administration. Chris, so glad you're with me on this episode of Storylines Live. Anything I missed in that introduction that you think our audience would benefit from knowing?
No, I think, Paul, you covered everything I could imagine and more. So thank you so much for the glowing start.
Well, you're welcome. This is a joke between Chris and me. I did not pull your police report, so.
That's good because, it all's downhill from there.
No, it's not. It's not. Chris, one of the reasons I'm so excited to have you on Storylines Live is because, we are fellow travelers in this crisis world, and we've both come to understand the importance of the story that an organization shares before, during, and after a crisis. So we always ask our guests, every episode I open up with those 4 questions, the capital S story, and It's why somebody would buy from you, work for you, invest in you, or partner
Hmm.
with you. For where you are in your evolution with the company and your career, which of those is most important to you?
Yeah, I think, obviously we come to every customer and every client with a partner view,
Mhm.
but obviously I want to be sincere and say we're hoping that they invest in the form of buying from us.
Right.
And so that would probably be the S that we should focus on.
Yeah, definitely. And I just have to say, for everybody watching and listening, when I speak on crisis, and Chris has heard me say this in some of our conversations, I talk about the time that a client called me and said, "Bad news, the building is on fire." And I said, "Oh my goodness, let's get out your crisis plan." And he said, "I can't. It's inside the building.
Yeah.
That is burning."
Yeah.
When we talk with Chris today, we're going to find out you don't have to worry about that anymore, right, Chris?
That's our hope, right? I mean, we find so many organizations that we work with have stories similar to what you just described.
Mhm.
Actually, our origins come from a similar story. So when we get to that point in our conversation, I'd love to share that with you.
Well, that's great. I look forward to that for sure. And I can guarantee folks watching and listening, you're really going to enjoy that too. Chris, in addition to asking about the capital S story, we always
Mhm.
like to ask our guests what's their take on storytelling. As somebody who's
Yeah.
come to this as a technologist and a crisis counselor, where do you see the role of storytelling?
Oh, it's so important. I mean, it starts with the fact that trust, the protection of your brand, your reputation, all the things that we're taught in school about why storytelling is important are all valid. And when I layer into that the fact that to do that consistently and consistently well, you need support. And so we always looked at technology as not replacing storytelling, but
Right.
rather amplifying and creating alignment in an organization to make sure you put your best foot forward.
Well, that is well said. And, I had a speaking engagement earlier this week, and I was sharing with the CEOs and executives in the room that your story is never more important than when you're in a crisis. But you have to
Yeah.
have a story before you get to the crisis. And and the PR and crisis communications end of of the space, we refer to this as putting deposits in the bank of goodwill. We
Hmm.
worked with a client in a crisis one time. My first meeting with the CEO, he said, "I'm really proud of our company. When you search us on Google, you can't find anything." Then they set something on fire in a major highway project. And in the next 24 hours, everything that you saw about that company was negative. So that was not a very good bank account of
Yeah.
story. And, I think we're going to dig into this as we talk about the company and your platform.
Hmm.
Effective crisis planning means having things in place beforehand.
That's
And
right.
certainly, from
That's
my
right.
perspective, the latest iteration of this, right, is having
Mhm.
a tool such as your company makes. Before we dig in more to talk about the company, give us a little bit of your background. How is
Yeah,
it
sure.
technologists wound up working on technology for crisis?
Yeah. So it really started with the work that we did when I was a founding executive at Vocus. And this goes back a few decades, not to put any age on me, but Vocus, we literally started out as a handful of folks with a mission to help communicators better position themselves and manage the life cycle of relationships in the marketplace.
Mm.
And overwhelmingly, what we found was the real stress point of communication was around crises and things that were not necessarily business as usual.
Mhm.
And so we built a lot of technology to help. And that organization, Vocus, grew and grew, and we were blessed with a great deal of success and support in the marketplace to the point where we actually went public. And so it was a really excellent experience. And that company is now owned by Cision and is a major piece of what defines what Cision is today. But that experience in helping communicators, we learned a ton, and myself, I learned a ton about communication in a crisis and what it meant, storytelling, and how technology could play an instrumental role. And that was really a big piece of what brought me to RockDove and how it complemented my journey.
Mm-hmm. That's great. So your own story,
Mhm.
how does it fit into what you're doing? In other words, that's a great
Yeah.
description of how the company wound up where it is today. But what about Chris? What is it about Chris that keeps you and your story engaged in this process?
Well, so it starts with what gets you up every morning. What gets me up every morning is the knowledge that clients that I'm supporting, that I'm building product for, that I'm helping my team support are having success.
Right.
And that success comes in a lot of very unspoken ways. For example, and I know we'll talk a little bit about maybe some clients' experiences, but one of the challenges we have in the crisis business is I can't really tell you the specifics of a client because they wouldn't appreciate a crisis being relived. Having said that, the joy and accolades that we get in our one-on-one conversations with clients about how the technology and the services that we provide help them through a tough day or a tough hour, and the support and compliments they're getting from executives about the way things work and how they were able to, in the end, reach a much better place than they would have had they not been prepared, not had the right framework and technology in place. That is phenomenal fulfillment for us. That's what gets our motor going, keeps the battery recharged.
Mhm. Yeah, I love that, and, you and I have talked about this before. You know, every industry has its awards and loves its awards and loves, as you suggested, to trumpet the successes, but this is a very weird end of the PR business, and I often joke
Yeah,
that there ought to be an award for the best headline you never read, because
that's right.
if we're doing our
So
job,
true.
you're not gonna hear about it, right? We
Yeah,
At our firm, we've won some awards for, crisis communication in rare instances where part of the success for our client was being able to talk publicly about the good things they did, to, stop the crisis or solve it, right? But that's so, so rare.
yeah.
Most of the time, what we're doing is under the hood, and we're trying to keep the car on the road, right?
Yep, absolutely. And hey, that's why you can't come to this mission with anything that doesn't include satisfaction in seeing people succeed.
Yeah, absolutely. 100%, Chris. Well, folks, we're going to take a quick break. And when we come back, we are going to dig into the role of technology and more specifically, in case of crisis from RockDove and how it works to help organizations be better prepared to manage crises when they happen. All right, everybody.
When you need to build up your team to handle the growing chaos at work, use Indeed Sponsored Jobs. It gives your job post the boost it needs to be seen and helps reach people with the right skills, certifications, and more. Spend less time searching and more time actually interviewing candidates who check all your boxes. Listeners of this show will get a $75 sponsored job credit at Indeed.com/podcast. That's Indeed.com/podcast. Terms and conditions apply. Need a hiring hero? This is a job for Indeed Sponsored Jobs.
Hey, welcome back to this episode of Storylines Live, the only podcast that explores the power and the meaning of the most important story in business. The one that answers why somebody would buy from you, work for you, invest in you, or partner with you. The story that defines the character and nature of an
Mhm.
organization. At Vindilli, we call that your capital S story. And we're honored to have in this episode as our guest, Chris Britton from RockDove Solutions. They are the makers of the In Case of Crisis app. And boy, is your story never more important than when you're preparing for, in the middle of, or coming out of a crisis. And
Yeah.
I am just blown away by what we can do today with technology to make crisis communications better. And I think course, it makes sense to start. Can you give us kind of an overview in case of crisis, what it's designed to do, and how your clients use it?
Sure, sure. So let me start with kind of why we exist. And then I think that'll be a great way for us to lean in on kind of how we're serving our customers today. So if I go all the way back in time and open up the book to the very first chapter, what I would tell you is that during the 2000s, I think we all navigated something that was pretty different for those of us, that had grown up in the United States, especially. And that is we had our 9/11 experience, which was profound and deeply affected many folk. We had the anthrax scare. We had the Virginia Tech shooting.
Yeah.
And we had an earthquake in Washington, D.C. And all of these events sort of reinforced a theme, which was people feeling like things were changing, and the ability to go and find a plan on a dusty shelf, back to the analogy you brought up earlier, was probably not a workable model moving forward. There were so many things that folks were being expected to respond to in these events. And by the way, everybody thinks of some of these events as, oh, those people in that location. But like most crises, there is a pebble in the pond effect. When something happens, it triggers many other events. Look recently at things like CrowdStrike.
Yes.
And the fact that it wasn't just a DDoS access error or whatever, it was the fact that you suddenly had airlines shutting down, and you had supply chain disruptions,
Yes.
and you had customer service no longer available. So what we saw in our genesis was there has to be a better way to approach all this that keeps the ability to manage and respond to a crisis and support our stakeholders at the forefront. And at that time, we also had this interesting technology starting to show up, and that was the iPhone.
Yes.
And iPhone had a very interesting adoption curve. Everybody thinks of iPhones as being adopted by, businesses, and then it trickles out to the consumer marketplace. It was the exact opposite. iPhones were adopted by consumers, and for our world, students.
Yes.
And then it became part of the business community as it overtook Blackberries. And for those that remember far enough back, Blackberries were king for a short period of time there. And then the iPhone just took off, and right around 2013, 2014, the iPhone started to take over the business community. And during that time, we launched the first generation of our platform called In Case of Crisis. And the whole goal of the platform was to take the planning that you did and to put it into a digital interactive relationship on the phone. And we had no idea at the time how pervasive these phones would become. But as we all have realized today, how would you live without your phone? Right?
Indeed.
The phone has replaced almost every other device you can think of, from flashlights to alarm clocks to the phone, of course, to messaging and
Cameras.
and everything in between, entertainment, TVs. Everything has been subsumed by the iPhone. So in our journey, what we did first was develop digital interactive playbooks. We then realized that the platform could do a lot more, because these playbooks were manifests of the crisis planning. It said, hey, when something happens, we want to be able to have it reviewed first here. This is how we want things to get reported. This is a list of things you should do, the protocols you should follow in a response. And we want to be able to do all this in a way where we can capture the work that's been done. And we want to be able to make sure that everybody that's involved sees what everybody else is doing so that we're on the same page. Because there's this little thing that still today is one of the biggest challenges for most practitioners, and that is silos.
Yes.
Most business operations struggle with knowing what the left and the right hand are doing, saying, and information they're gathering.
Mm-hmm.
And we took it upon ourselves with in case of crisis to help our clients by building a solution that would allow them to manage the full life cycle of crisis management and response without having to worry about silos, without having to worry about who needs to do what, all the responsibilities, the protocols, everything. So it's essentially bringing the crisis plan to life.
Yes.
And that's really what In Case of Crisis is about.
Well, that's awesome. And just to kind of piggyback on everything you've shared, if you go back the last 20, 25 years, the emergence of social media has compressed the news cycle so dramatically. I'll often do a crisis workshop, and at the beginning, I'll have the folks in the room. I'll give them 5 minutes to solve a crisis.
Yeah.
I think that's crazy. But when I started in the news business, the news cycle was 24 hours, which was determined by the morning paper in whatever community you were in. And it, got printed once a day, and that was the news cycle. And now the news cycle is 15 minutes. And if you
Yeah.
don't have your response figured out in the first 5, you're going to be cooked. It's just things move that fast. And so you've given a great overview of the need for platforms like In Case of Crisis. Can you talk a little bit more about that interactive component? Because I think that's
Yeah.
one of the most important aspects that we didn't have before. You'd have to have conference calls and get on landline phones and go
Yeah.
through paper documents.
Yeah.
And now when you have a
Yeah.
tool like yours, you can be texting, et cetera, et cetera. Give the audience a sense of how that works, Chris.
Yeah. So you teed this up perfectly, Paul, in the sense that the tools that we operate with every day have changed. You look at where we are today, everybody has Teams in the corporate space
Yes.
or some type of collaboration tool.
Zoom or something.
We're all used to that instant ability to connect with people. The challenge, though, with those systems is they're not guardrailed. They don't have a purpose to them other than to communicate and connect. So one of the things that we identified was we didn't want to necessarily change the behavior or the benefit. But what we did want to do was put in place sort of the practice framework so that a team could come together, chat, do all the communicating they need to do, but within the parameters of a flow and a set of guidance that allowed them to do it with best practice in mind. And so that they could get the rewards of that sort of convenient behavior and benefit of easy communication, but also the record capture, the moving in the right direction, making sure everybody's on the right page as far as what we're doing and how we're doing it. So we built into this collaboration the ability to handle all of the benefits with integration to Teams and
Right.
to the tools that everybody wants, but bringing it all together with the proper workflow.
Mm-hmm. So that in the app, everything is focused first, foremost, and always on the task at hand, which is preparing for managing the crisis, right?
Absolutely. And that's what you want to make sure happens. It's easy to set up. It's integrating all of the tools that you know and love, and at the same time creating autonomy. In other words, one of the things that we didn't talk much about yet, Paul, you talked about the speed
Mm-hmm.
of the response that needs to occur. What we didn't talk about yet was the variety of crises that we are now faced with that just 5 years ago even didn't exist.
Right.
I mean, all of the different types of cyber attacks that we need to respond and manage, the social media that occurs and how that can in itself become a wildfire, the growing natural disaster, the changing landscape of global strife. Those are all affecting us in so many different ways as an operator of a business.
Yeah.
And the problem you have is you can't write a book big enough or organized well enough to deal with all that. So you have to have a good framework and you have to have automation that personifies that framework in order to keep up.
Yeah, and that's exactly what the app does. You know, Chris, we talked a little bit before the break. You mentioned some client success stories, and obviously, I will say this in pretty much every episode: share a client success story and keep it anonymous if you have to. I think probably in this case, you have to keep every example you share anonymous, given the nature of the business. But I'm sure our audience will understand. Can you help them get a sort of a picture of how
Sure.
case of crisis works by sharing some of those?
Yeah, sure. So as they say in the old Sergeant Friday episodes, protect the innocent and all that good stuff. One example that comes to mind as we're talking is a private equity firm that approached us that had a whole portfolio of companies. And this is a many billion-dollar private equity firm. And they can do just about anything they want, and they realized the risk and exposure of their investment with their holding companies. And they said, look, we want to put in place a effective way to make sure that our individual companies are prepared to handle crises. And they cited things like all this stuff going on with ICE
Yeah.
and being able to prepare, how as an organization we're going to handle ICE knocking at our door to obviously support the law, but also make sure that we don't, create a further crisis out of it. The growing that we talked about before, growing variety and impact of cyber, dealing with workplace violence prevention and intervention, dealing with weather events that could cripple operation of some of their locations. So the deal was, I said, well, what do you guys have? What is in place today? And that's something we always ask, do you have a plan? And at no shock to anybody, when you talk to most organizations, the answer is they either have no plan or an old plan
Yes,
that's outdated, that's not going to survive first contact.
exactly.
And so part of what we decided to do was come in with a complete framework that could allow them to immediately benefit both from technology and and advice. And we put that into a turnkey deliverable
Mhm.
so that these firms, and these are big companies, they were, medium-sized enterprises, large enterprises, and by packaging for them this deliverable and giving them this type of capability, they were able to take each of these company in a matter of weeks
Wow.
and take them from no plan or ill prepared to a digitally interactive and prepared organization, being able to start doing training exercises, being able to do all this. And the best part about it is we were able to do it at a fraction of what they were spending for brick and mortar tools. Too much of the industry today is fragmented, just like the silos that we talk about in operation. We also talk about the silos of technology and services that people are often investing in and trying to use to do this and also do this and also do this. And what they find is these systems can become quite expensive. Traditional incident systems, traditional mass notification systems, they just are very expensive and often don't get the customer where they really want to be with their risk profile. So we've come in and really helped organizations do that. And we did that in this case. We're addressing billions of dollars in operations with a solution and a strategy that gets them from 0 to 100 very, very quickly and very affordably.
Wow, Chris, that is fantastic. I hope our audience has enjoyed that as much as I have. This is a part of the business where storytelling and crisis has really, really changed, and where it's going to continue to change. Chris, what's the best way for our audience to reach you and Rock Dove if they're interested in connecting with you?
Absolutely. So number one, my phone number, 240-404-8155. You may be able to add it to follow up for folks. My email, brittonc@RockDove Solutions, which we can also add. The website, rockdovesolutions.com. We have our information out there. And I do think we could add a link and would offer, I have a crisis readiness white paper that covers a lot of this topic that we're discussing. Would be a great follow-up for folks that would like to learn more. I gave a link that we can use. So if you want to reach us, we're here to help you. But if you'd like to be left alone, don't worry. We won't come and bother you, knock on your door or anything like that.
That's great, Chris. Chris, it's been so great to have you on this episode of Storylines Live. I really appreciate both our In the Real World partnership and also your willingness to join us today to help our audience learn more about what you do. And folks, I'm going to say thank you to everybody who's watched and listened to this episode of Storylines Live. I hope it helps you better understand why that capital S story we talk about all the time is never more important than when you're in a crisis, and that you need to have the right tools in order to better share that story. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you in the next episode of Storylines Live.
You may know you're listening to this show along the Marketing Podcast Network, but did you know there are other great shows on MPN to help your business? Heather Eck hosts an amazing show called Your Radiant Spirit. Heather, tell listeners about the show.
What if the colors you're drawn to, the creative urges you ignore, and the quiet intuitive hits you brush off are actually trying to tell you something? Your Radiant Spirit is the podcast that helps you listen and live with greater clarity and purpose.
And where can people subscribe?
You can find and subscribe at heathereck.com/yourradiantspirit on marketingpodcast.net or search for it wherever you get your podcasts.
You heard her. Go subscribe. This podcast is heard along the Marketing Podcast Network. For more great marketing podcasts, visit marketingpodcasts.net.